So we are going to be recording all of our faculty power lunches, and we are in the process of developing a web page where those are all going to live permanently. If you'd like to review them or share them with someone else, it will all be available. That should be ready by next week. In the meantime, once the recording is ready today or tomorrow, I will be sending it out for everybody along with my slides for today. So welcome. I know a few of you are just joining us. If you go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, tell us what you teach and one thing you're hoping to learn today. I see a couple have already responded. I know I'm not going to get to responding to every person, but I would love to get that record captured there for us. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. This is the second ever faculty power lunch and our first one to kick off this semester. We're going to be meeting every other Thursday at 12:30 p.m. to share and discuss some quick tips that you can use to help your students succeed. As I mentioned, if some of you are just joining and you haven't met me, I'm Heather Young-Manduhano. I'm the Senior Instructional Designer here on the Eastern Campus. So by a show of hands, if you can find that little raise hand button down on that bottom bar of WebEx for me, how many of you already use PowerPoint or another slideshow program in your classes? Go ahead, raise your hands for me. Seeing a lot of hands go up, and I'm guessing that's why you're here today. It is such a great tool. I know that PowerPoint gets a really bad rap with death by PowerPoint and all of that, but I think that it can be used effectively. So my goal today is to share some examples and some tips that you can use to help you use it even better. We are going to start off with a little appetizer today. I am going to show you a sample slide. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to study the slide, and then there's going to be a short quiz. Now, this is for demonstration purposes only, okay? I don't expect you to know all the answers, and I chose a really fun topic just to make this a fun little getting started activity this afternoon. All right, so you've got 5 seconds to study the slide, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. Okay, on your mark, get set, and go. Okay, time's up. All right, so let's see if you were able to get any information off of that slide I just shared. First of all, what breed is my dog? Either shout it out or put it in the chat.
Pug.
Everyone always thinks she's a pug. She's not a pug. Good guess, though.
Might be a Shih Tzu.
And everyone always thinks always pug and Shih Tzu. I also get, is it a dog? That's a question I get a lot. Now, how old is my little baby? Anybody know?
8 and above.
No idea, but she had a cute outfit.
She does have a cute outfit. She
or
loves
above.
Which I'm giving away one of my answers to my next one, which is name one thing she likes besides wearing cute outfits that I just said. What's something she likes?
Cookies.
Okay, that was near the beginning of the paragraph. You got that. Great. And what's something she doesn't like? I made it hard on purpose. Okay, so what could I have changed on that slide to make it easier to remember that information?
Too much text.
Too much text. That's a great answer. What else?
Bullet points.
Bullet points. Absolutely. Those are excellent answers. All right, so let's take a look at a revised version and give me a thumbs up if you think you could have gotten the answers to these 4 questions in 5 seconds with this slide. It's a lot better, right? So this version improves our color contrast. If you noticed, I had a very light text on a light background and, kind of put layers of text over top of a picture on that first one. It includes only the important information that you need to answer those questions that I was going to ask you. So I got rid of some of the fluff. And then I organized the content visually so that you can skim and see those important points and have it organized in a way that makes it easy for you to remember. And you still get a cute puppy picture of my dear, sweet little Daphne. I almost wish I was working from home today. I'd bring her and hold her up and you'd all get a chance to meet her. But this just goes to show that I can have the same information on a slide, but the way that we organize that information and the way that we format it can really have a big impact on the user experience. All right, so let's dive right in. By the end of today's session, you're going to be able to apply core visual design principles, including text, images, font, and layout to improve slide clarity and readability. You're going to be able to create visually focused slides that guide student attention and support quick scanning for key ideas. And you are going to be able to evaluate and revise lecture slides to ensure that they are supporting your instruction. All right, so we are going to dive right in here. We're going to do a countdown format, 5 quick tips, and then we'll have some time to discuss. Tip number 5 is to use your images to explain rather than to decorate your slides. We can say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but for instructional purposes, we need to make sure that that picture is helping to explain a concept rather than just to decorate the slide or to be there as filler. So as you're thinking about adding images, make sure that they are adding instructional value to your lecture by helping students to gain a better understanding. You want to look for images that are going to help to clarify ideas, processes, or relationships so that it's helping to reinforce student understanding and retention. And then also keeping it simple. You want to choose images that can be understood quickly at a quick glance versus something more complex that might take a long time for a student to analyze. So let me take this tip and I will show you two different examples of an image. In this example, I have used an image that relates to the tip. So I'm saying that the image should be used to explain something. So I have an image of a chart that explains something. So this is kind of reinforcing that idea and creating like that additional neural pathway in your brain, right? By contrast, I could put this picture up. It's a tip. I'm giving you a thumbs up. Great, but that doesn't have anything to do with using images to explain things, right? So it's an okay image. There's nothing inherently wrong with it, but the other one would be a better choice for enhancing understanding. Now, tip number 4 is to make your text easy to read. You want to choose 1 or 2 fonts for your presentation and then apply them consistently throughout. You'll notice as we're going through this presentation today that I have 1 font that is used for headings and subheadings and 1 font that is used for bullet points and other information that I'm adding to the slides. I'm also using a couple of different colors to help to enhance that, and I'm using that consistently throughout. So you'll see all of these tip slides, for example, are formatted the same. When you are choosing a font, you want to keep it simple. This is not the time to put your curly cues or your cursive fonts in there. Choose a sans serif font, and if you don't know what that means, I am going to show you in just a minute. I have a slide on that. And you want to keep it to a minimum size of at least 28, and if you can get it closer to like a 32 or a 36, that is even better. You want every student, even if they're in the back row of a lecture hall, to be able to see clearly the text that you have on your slides. Now note that a 28 is not PowerPoint's default. I think if you go to make a text box, it defaults to like a size 18 or something like that. So you want to make sure that you are enhancing that by making that font a little bit bigger as you're developing your slides. And then lastly on this tip is to consider accessibility. Adequate color contrast, as you saw from my original slide today, is really, really important. And we also want to avoid using color alone to indicate meaning. So you can use color to emphasize important words. I have all my tips today in blue, but I have also made that text bold. So it will stand out to you whether you can see the color blue or not. So if you use color to indicate meaning, that is okay, but you also need to use a formatting tool like bold or italics. Try to avoid underlining. First, it makes it harder to read the text, but also underline on a digital environment typically indicates a hyperlink, so that can be a little bit confusing for your students. All right, so now I'm going to break this slide and break all of my tips that I just shared and show you what not to do. All right, so what makes this really hard to read?
The curly cues, the small font.
And then if you can see tip number 4 over there on the left, that is a really bad example of color contrast because it is almost the same color as the background. Now I broke this really big on purpose, right? But it goes to show you that applying these tips can really make a big difference. And I did say that I would explain what a serif versus a sans serif font is. So here is an example of that. I have some serif fonts on the left, probably the most common of which being Times New Roman, contrasted with some sans serif fonts on the right side of the screen. So serifs are the little dashes that you might be able to see typically at the bottom or at the top of the letters in these types of fonts. And we try to avoid those for a couple of reasons. Number one, if it's on a digital screen, if students looking at it on their phone, on their laptop, whatever, especially if it's kind of a small size, it can kind of create these lines over the top and bottom of the letters visually, and that can make it hard to read. And then it also just makes it a little bit more challenging all the way around for your students. And then your sans serif fonts are things here that are a lot more streamlined, a lot more formatted. And these 3 that I selected over here are some key ones. Franklin Gothic is Tri-C's official font. Lato is the Brightspace default font, and Aptos is the Microsoft default font. All right, Melissa, I see your hands up. Go ahead.
Yes, I was just curious. You pointed out the sans serif fonts, and I noted earlier that Lato is the bright space default. If it is not serif, why did bright space go with that?
Well, we want to use sans serif fonts. These are these are the good
we
ones.
want to use
Yeah.
sans serif.
Yes,
Okay, I thought
yeah,
you said
avoid
use
these.
serif.
Next time, okay, so this is a place where I could visually enhance this slide by putting a little red X over here and a little green check mark over here, right? I'll take that note and I will add that to the slide before I do this presentation again. Thank you for asking though, because I'm sure you're not the only one that had that question. Excellent example.
Thank you.
So avoid serif, choose sans serif. Good fonts, less good fonts. All right, great question though. Thank you for asking. All right, moving on to tip number 3, which is to create a visual focus. Your slides should be really easy to scan. You saw a really good example of that with our appetizer activity today, where I showed you a little paragraph of tons of text and then bullet points and colors and backgrounds and kind of a better layout and organization. You want to make sure that you are using a well-structured layout to highlight those main points. And then you want to consider size, color, and placement to guide the eye to where you want it to go. So if you look at the design I have going on over here, we have this check mark here with tip number 3, which is kind of leading down to the most important information, which is the actual text of that tip, which I've made a different color, I've made it a different font, and I've made it bold. And then lastly, we want to think about creating a visual hierarchy. So you can do that with headings, subheadings, bullet points, maybe 2 different fonts. You don't want to get too crazy and use 5 or 6 or 7 different fonts to do that, but trying to have kind of like a tier 1, 2, 3 on your slide can really help. Now let's take a look at what happens if I take all of that formatting that I just explained and I take it away. You see the difference? If I go back and forth between those two, this one shows you very clearly, okay, we're on tip 3 and this is the tip and this is what you have to do. If I go here, it takes you a minute. You have to kind of go and read through everything, and it doesn't really create that opportunity for quick scanning of information. All right, so let's jump ahead to our next one, which is number 2, and that is that your should support what you say. Like a silent partner that is there to agree with you, but also to enhance what you're saying as you're going throughout your presentation. If your students can read the slide deck and get your whole lecture, it probably doesn't need to be a lecture. It's kind of like the classroom equivalent of this meeting could have been an email, right? So look for ways to reduce the amount of text on your screen so that your voice is carrying the meaning. You want your slides to encourage your students to listen to you and understand what you are telling them. Choose keywords and short bullet points. So the slide should be supporting what you're saying and maybe prompting you to stay on track. I know that I absolutely rely on PowerPoint a little too much to remember my sequence as I'm going through a presentation, but it shouldn't echo exactly what you say. You want to keep your students focused by aligning what you say with what they are viewing on the screen simultaneously. Personally, I like to animate my bullet points as you've seen today. I know that for myself as a learner, if I'm in a lesson or a presentation, whatever it is, and I see a slide and it has all the bullet points already there, I am reading ahead to see what's coming up next because I'm curious, and then I'm not listening fully to the person who is presenting and telling me really important things about those bullet points. So I know that comes down a little bit to personal preference. You can always survey your students and see what they would prefer, or try it a couple different ways and see what works best. But for me, I like to use the animated bullet points. I think it helps to maintain focus. Now, let's suppose that instead of putting these bullet points on the slide, as you have just seen, and I explain each one and talk a little bit about it, what would happen if I took everything that I said and I put it on the slide? Well, what you are looking at is my slide notes for the slide that I just did. And as you can see, if I was to start going through this and saying, think of your slides like a silent partner, and I'm going through all of this, well, you can just read it. You don't need me to read it to you. So try to make sure that you're thinking of ways that you can condense that, and then you can use your slide notes to write out everything that you want to say and help you plan. But keeping those bullet points really concise can really help your students. All right, we're on our last tip, which is tip number 1, and that is to use more slides with less content on each slide. Controversial opinion. A lot of people talk about death by PowerPoint and that there's too many slides and that's death by PowerPoint. I actually think it's the opposite. I think it is worse to try and cram too much information onto one slide And in doing so, you're probably going to end up breaking most of the other tips in this presentation anyway. So try to spread things out across a larger slide deck so that each slide can be really focused. That, first of all, calls attention to the key points like we've been talking about. And it also is a way to provide quick visual changes throughout your presentation, which is another way to keep your students engaged. So remember that your slides are there to support student listening and help your students pay attention to you. That is the most important part of your lecture. So design your slides with student listening in mind. Limit yourself to one idea per slide. A good rule of thumb is one heading and maybe 5 or so bullet points, and trying to keep that really concise. Now, I know a lot of you are going to say, but I have such really long and detailed explanations. Great, that's awesome. Split them up onto multiple slides. If you have a slide right now and it has 10 bullet points on it, make that 2 slides with 5 bullet points and make the text bigger, and then try and reduce the words on each of those bullet points that you have. Now, as an example, I very intentionally designed this presentation so that each tip was its own slide with the animated bullet points, and then I allowed some space for some explanations or sample slides to kind of come in between those. Now, what if I had done the whole presentation and I put all of my tips on one slide? Can you imagine me going through this whole 10 or 12 minutes, however long it's been, going through tip number 1, we're going to use less slides and go through each one of these as it is here. This is the exact same information. I copy and pasted the text verbatim onto this slide. Now, I will say this is great as a reference. If you wanted to have like a little printable of the key points we talked about today, you could print this slide out and tape it to your office, and that would be a really great resource for you. However, as far as a presentation tool, this is not the best design to use for a live presentation. All right, that brings us to the end of our 5 tips for today. Does anyone have any questions for me? All right, Chris, your hand is up. Go for it.
Hi. So I was curious about gradient backgrounds that PowerPoint allows you to use. Do those tend to disrupt the accessibility of the slide presentation, or can you use those without doing so?
That's a really good question. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and if I can maybe even do a little demo. It depends on the gradient. So what you have to do is look at the text on the gradient, where it is, and how much of a contrast is going between that dark to light background. If it's a little bit, or if most of the gradient part is happening kind of on one side of the slide where you don't have that critical text, that's an option. One thing that I do a lot if I'm going to use a background that has a gradient or even another type of image on it is to put a rectangle text box over top of it and make it slightly transparent, so it is kind of lightening the whole effect or darkening the whole effect, depending which way I want to go, and then adding my text. But in any case, if you run your PowerPoint through the accessibility checker, it will check it for color contrast, and that's going to give you a pretty good idea of whether that is an okay contrast or not, because there's a lot of different gradients and a lot of different colors you can use.
Okay, great, thank you.
No problem. Great question. Any other questions? Oh, yes. And Crystal brings up a great point about templates. I will say, just because it's a template in PowerPoint doesn't make it accessible. I have run across that. But yes, look for one that is designed to be accessible, and that should help you greatly. I know especially some of the older templates that have been in there for a while. I used to use them thinking, oh, well, if PowerPoint made them, they must be accessible color contrast. And then I found out they're not. So it really just depends. And you can also change the colors on templates too. You can go into the design assistant and mess around with it and kind of customize it to whatever you like it to be. Thank you, Crystal. Anyone else have any questions? All right, let me pop out of my presentation for just a second, and I'm going to go ahead and here. And let me just share PowerPoint, and let's talk about how you can kind of work around some of those color contrast issues. And then I will also show you where you will find the accessibility checker. All right. I have too many tabs open right here. There we go. Okay, so we're now in my slide file. If you want to run accessibility checker, you're going to click on review up here in the review tab, and then you can go to check accessibility. Now, I'm going to tell you that I know this isn't 100% accessible, and I will make it 100% accessible before I send it out. I added some images, and I haven't done the alt text on those yet. But let's see what happens if I come over here, and you're going to see it's probably best that I didn't have everything here. I have a couple of slides that don't have a slide title. I have duplicate slide titles, those I know about, and then some places where I've added some content I need to check reading order, and then images that I added for today's presentation that need alt text. So this is telling me, interestingly, that I don't have any text contrast issues, but I know that I do, because if I go to my Daphne slide from here, I intentionally made this really hard to see. I can make that a little bit darker, and there. Now you can see that it says Meet Daphne. I bet a lot of you missed that when I did it the first time. So that's interesting that it didn't catch that, because I went to make an extreme version kind of on purpose. But if we wanted to do something with like a gradient background, let me just go and kind of make a dummy slide here. I have too many little things of you all up here moving around on my slide. So here, what I'm going to do is just do, make this simple so I don't have to go and redo my whole slide background. We're going to make this, and then we're going to go shape fill, and we'll do a gradient, and let's just do kind of like this. And so then if I grab a text box and I stick that on top, I'm just going to make this kind of take up the whole space there. So I think in this particular case, this to me is looking like it's probably okay in terms of color contrast. But if I were to change the gradient on that and make it one of like there were darker ones that I saw in there. Do something like that. Well, then that's not going to be accessible. I am looking at these. I haven't used gradients in quite a while, and I'm seeing that they seem to be less extreme in terms of gradient than they used to be. And to me, if I made this light text, this would probably be okay. Now, one thing that you can do if you have something like this is to create a secondary rectangle, stick it behind wherever your text is going to go. We're going to send that backwards one level so that my text is in front. And then what we can do is for the shape fill, I can choose white, and then I can go to more fill colors, and we can increase the transparency a little bit like that. And then that makes it much easier to read. So that's kind of a little hack that I use quite a bit if I'm dealing with a background like that or a picture, and I need to add some text on top of it. All right, hopefully that helps. Any other questions before I jump into our guiding questions for today? I'm gonna check the chat. I haven't been over there in a hot minute. All right, so let me jump over to our slides one more time. You're gonna see my crazy messy screen. Does anyone else have a thing where it has been changing your background picture voluntarily without you asking it to every day? Today I got a kangaroo and I was like, okay, I'm not mad at the kangaroo. All right, so let's jump into some questions I have for you then. So if you could make one small visual change to your slides this semester, what would that be? And what do you hope it would improve for your students? You can either unmute or go ahead and put that information in the chat.
I think
Anyone have any-
sometimes I have too much text. And in those instances, what I usually do is go in and circle the key things that I want them to take. And I say, you don't have to focus on this. Just go with 1, 5, and 3. But I think what I'll do now is just go and clean out and get rid of 2 and 4. And just
There you
leave
go.
1, 3, and 5. Make it easier.
There you go. There you go. If it's not important, it doesn't need to be there. Simplify it, right? Like, don't distract with extra nice to have information. Or if you have like nice to have but not critical information, maybe you have your core slides that maybe, I don't know how many you have, to 20, 30, 40, it doesn't matter. And then maybe you have, here's some optional nice to have information, and you kind of put that at the end or at key points throughout and kind of separate that out. And that might help students to focus a little more. That's a great idea. Absolutely. Yeah, I think if I see one thing that when I look at PowerPoints, it's typically too much information, too much text on one slide.
Right.
All right. I saw a hand go up. I'm sorry, I didn't see whose hand went up. Let me open my
It
participant.
was mine.
Okay,
It
go
was
ahead. Go
mine.
for it.
So I've been working on this actually for the last couple of years, updating, animating my slides, doing all of the things that you just said, but not quite to this level. So my question is, what is your ideal number of slides? You know,
Okay.
depending on what I'm teaching at the time, I have a lot
Yes.
of information and I'll end up with 40 slides. And then other times I
100%.
only have 20. What is ideal to hold
So
interest?
for me, I look at how long am I planning to be presenting for? And I'm thinking for myself, typically about 1 to 2 slides per minute. And I know that sounds like a lot. It depends though, because you might have a slide where you're displaying an image and you might be having an interactive discussion about that slide that is going on for several minutes. For example, here I put a question and we're talking about it. So I'm leaving this slide up for a lot longer than one of those that just has 3 bullet points on it. So there is some give and take, and it depends. Are you using the slide while you're speaking and it's kind of echoing what you're saying and enhancing the presentation? Or is it a place where you're pausing for an activity or for conversation? And those are 2 different types of slides. And so your ratio of those types of slides is going to determine how many you're going to need for a given presentation. I will say that like when I go to do a full workshop that might be an hour or more, I easily have 50 slides or more for that presentation. And again, it just depends. You might have a slide that has a video on it that's playing for 5 minutes, and that of course is going to take up additional time. So I think it depends on your style. It depends on how often you're pausing for those interactions and all of those things. But I try to create kind of a flow so that we're having quick visual interaction. So one thing that I do when I teach about doing videos, and it kind of ties into doing PowerPoint as well, is to think about when you watch a news program on television or on your phone or whatever, that they're constantly changing the visual and it kind of has a rhythm to it. Change, 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 whether that's something coming up on the screen or changing to a different camera angle. It's really hard to replicate that in a live environment, but I do try to say like, well, how quickly can you make that visual change so that you're keeping that engagement and keeping kind of like a pacing with it. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank
Right.
you.
I am going to jump ahead to some final information and then I'll stick around for a couple of minutes if anybody has any additional questions. So for our dessert today, I have next steps for success, and this also ties into SEUs for our adjuncts. 3 options if you want to get an SEU, and I would recommend anybody do all of the options just because it's good for you. I love when dessert is healthy, right? So option number 1 is to take one of these tips that you learned in today's presentation, apply it to a PowerPoint presentation, and then email that to idteam@tri-c.edu for some feedback. Option number 2 is to schedule a consult with the ID team to discuss or implement one of the tips that you learned today. And then another option for adjuncts who are looking for that SEU is to attend 3 power lunches. We are tracking attendance based on the WebEx data that we are exporting afterwards, and we will be going into Compass periodically, probably about every 3 to 4 weeks, and updating and giving credit to anybody who has attended 3 or more. So that will all be in there eventually. All right, so those are your desserts. Next steps for success for today. We have about a minute and a half left if there are any final questions, but I do want to put my contact information and the QR code to our appointments page on the screen if anybody needs that. Any other questions or anything you'd like to share before we wrap up this afternoon?
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us. I'll stick around for a minute in case there's any questions. We will meet again same time in 2 weeks. You'll be getting an email next week with kind of just a save the date and then an email with the join link on the day of. All right. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'll be following up by email by end of day tomorrow. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day. Bye everybody.